Hello, I'm Craig Constantine. Are you passionate about creating amazing podcasts? Terrific. You are in the right place. Welcome to Pod Talk, short conversations with podcast creators that are not just about podcasting, because I like to take the scenic route. My guest today is Julie Angel, who's actually gone on several scenic routes with me in real life. Welcome, Julie. How are you this morning?
Hi, Craig. Thank you for having me here. I am well.
Terrific. No backstory. So Julie is the person who did, for those people listening who know that I have like a parkour thing. If you ask me what is parkour and I have a chance to send someone a URL, I send them well, it's on YouTube now, but your movie, Movement of Three. I'll put the link in the show notes. And I've always thought, from the very moment that I saw it, I've always thought it was, well, first of all, when it came out, it was like most stuff is here. And then there's this video comes out. It's like, whoa, the production, like who shot this? This is clearly somebody who's done documentary film. So I kind of want to start us talking about documentary. Is documentarianism a word? Or like,
Can be.
yeah,
It
it is now.
is now.
So my first thought is you not so recently started your own podcast, and we talked before and you said it was delightful because you're just like, takes 20 minutes though, this gear, that thing, click, and you're done. It's not really a big lift these days. But I'm wondering I don't want to say what mistakes you see podcasters make, from your perspective of understanding documentary and even anthropology. And I'm just looking for the perspective from the anthropologist or the perspective from the documentarian about how or what are some ideas that we should be considering when we're making podcasts.
Sure. So my background is so I started my first ever project I did when I left school was actually working in community radio. And I would do 2.5 days a week. And for me, that was perfect. It was like, okay, great. And then I need to go out to play the rest of the time. So that really suited me. And then I had various adventures in the world of portrait photography and having a quote proper job, which didn't suit me in any
Which
way, shape,
wasn't
or
proper,
form.
right?
At 19 years old, I was like, no, this is not a sustainable option for me to go to the same place every day at certain times on certain days. This is not working. And so then I did sound engineering and music production. And then I went to art school and I did film production. And so having these audiovisual trainings were so key. And what made it really easy for me to then go, oh, like I'm so happy the technology is so accessible now. It's just democratized everything in the same way that phone cameras did, in the same way that when YouTube began, I joined YouTube a few months after it began because I was looking for places to put films I'd made that were short form
It's the
content.
only place, right?
So prior to YouTube, you could enter film festivals, and like the highest echelon would be your film would be on one of the kind of trailers on an airplane. Like you had landed, you like if you could do that. And so short form content was really a kind of unknown entity at that time. So all of these things have just democratized it. And yet there's still a difference between quality and something that everyone can do more easily now. And having gone through, and particularly having gone through the process of working on fiction films, so being the sound recordist on film dramas, you're always listening. And it's more about the listening than about anything else. And when you're interviewing, you don't want any bleed. And the bleed is the crossover of my voice on your voice, so there's no separation, etc. And if you can't separate an element, you can't then control that element. And so the technical side of things so that's kind of from the technical side of things. And then if I put my visual anthropology hat on, which is really about, for me, visual anthropology was using my audiovisual training to celebrate, explain, and share difference in the world. So how does one person's or culture's way of doing things, how can I share and express and communicate that to another group or culture
Mm.
that can then benefit from those understandings and learnings? So my field work was to go and understand the parkour community. So you're playing this insider outsider role all of the time of, well, I need to be in it to understand it, but then I need to be able to come outside of it to explain it in ways that all the other people who are outside of it could understand it.
Understand.
Because there's a different language, there's a different culture, there's a different value system, and having audiovisual tools was my methodology. Other people have done similar things using illustration. Other people, traditionally, anthropology, a lot of anthropology was done through the written word. So someone
Mhm.
would go in the field, whether that was, some explorer going to an island or a jungle. And people have this idea of anthropologists in this sort of Indiana Jones
Right,
type-esque
right.
adventure. Um, and what was really came through in my visual anthropology fieldwork, which connects to podcasting, is the less technology you have, the better the conversations will be. So when I was doing the filming of these parkour people, going into this movement culture, and also when I started doing that research, I was a 35-year-old woman going and spending time with generally 18 to 20-year-old guys. So it was there was a demographic that was very different. There's a context that we all have that we bring to any recording endeavor or situation. And the smaller my technology was, the more I could wear either no headphones or a hidden
Yeah, one
in
side, right?
ear headphone, the better the communication and conversation. So the more that the technology becomes less of a thing, even visually. So I look at you with your headphones on, and they're great headphones, and I try and hide mine with just one thing under my hair. But I'm sat
Whenever
there with this big microphone in front of me, but I made it black, and so I wear black.
Mhm.
But if we were both sat opposite, if we were sat at a dinner table or in a coffee shop, our ease would be different. So
Sure.
the more, because you're ultimately looking to see how, I mean, there's a difference between also, are you a hard hitting investigative journalist?
Yeah.
Are you someone who's looking for engagement? Are you just looking for someone to share their educational tips? I think you need to kind of know your why. And then in the podcasting realm, it's to really understand the what the role is and what kind of communication you want to have here. Is it like, well, for me, it's just me and you in this room
Right.
and audience of one, me and thee. That's it. And if we have a great conversation and we know there's going to be value for it, that's amazing, because you want people to stay in the present. You want people to not be uh, aware of, am I saying this in a way and is someone going to benefit from that? Depending on maybe, or if you're like, this is my thing and I present and I perform. So are
Right.
you a podcast of performance, or are you a podcast of authentic conversation? Are you a podcast of education? And I think it's just interesting to be clear on your why, and then you can really lead with what's going to work best for that.
Hmm.
And it has to, like, nobody can get away with crap sound. Even as a filmmaker,
That's in the way, right?
it's amazing, honestly, what shitty visuals you can get away with if you've got good sound, because nobody can, it's such a stress on our brain to have warble, warble, wind in the
Or like when our
background.
call gets laggy, when this call itself that we're using gets laggy, it's like, oh, it takes some strength to pretend that it's not freaking me out, right?
Yeah, or you're on the phone to someone and you really want to talk to them and you're like, I'm sorry, it's really hard to hear you. Like, it's really hard to understand what you're saying. It's tiring. And if there's a little friction point of maybe somebody's nervous or they're rushed or on, then like that just throws the whole thing. So The things that I see as someone who's come from this audiovisual background and done the anthropology and the field work, where you're just looking to like, how can someone share their thing? How, like, you're bringing someone on because there's something that you want them to share. So how can you facilitate this sharing, this understanding, or and whether it's an expose, or whether it's education, or whether it's just pure comedy, or whether it's just an excuse to catch up with a friend, like it's all good. To take the steps you can to understand the tools you're working with, and to know that they're just tools. You can be the best technician, but if you can't engage in a conversation respectfully, it's really not going to go far.
I was thinking when you were talking about performance, sometimes I was going to say see, but I usually only listen to audio shows. But when I see podcasters, you can hear, I don't know if I feel like that they're trying to put on an affect, but sometimes you can hear that they're struggling. And that's, I don't know, it's like telling jokes. Some people can tell them and some can't. Some people just show up, they hit record, especially like when I have guests, like in person. Some people show up, they sit down, I point a microphone at them, and it's just like, tech isn't even here. We're just doing our thing. And at the end, I'm just like, oh, wow, that's an hour and 40 minutes of awesome. I don't know how we're going to edit that. And then other times I can clearly see people are really struggling. And I'm kind of wondering, there's two things and a little bit extra. So if you're wondering, this is actually what Julie is like normally. I know you spend enough time with you in person that like, this is what she's always like. You're walking down the street going from point A to point B, and it's exactly these kinds of conversations. And Julie doesn't affect anything to show up like this. The other point was, I don't know whether to encourage people who feel imposter syndrome to just like ignore it, hit record and do the thing, or whether it's better, and I actually don't know the answer to this question. I'm not just like setting it up, or whether it's better to say, you really need to figure that out. Like, is it better to just let people work through it because of the beauty of it's all free tape now? Like, you just play it all into the void forever. So you think there's a difference in whether people just try to like work it out, work through it, or whether they should really, no, if that's a problem, you should really stop, and please stop doing that until you figure out how to how to show up for real?
I think we get better at what we practice, and we get better at what we do. Like it's like anything, there's training. And I think that to put yourself in a kind of comfortable or safe environment during that practice is really helpful. So I'm really a believer in like, set yourself up for success. Like if you feel you're not doing this well, like a friend of mine, Steve Gangemi, said to me when I started being a guest on people's podcasts, and I said like, oh yeah, I'm doing this podcast thing. And he said, oh yeah. And I was like, oh, you've done quite a few. Like, do you enjoy them? And he was like, yeah. I said, do you ever listen back to them? He's like, no, never. I was like, cool. I'm never going to listen back to mine. Because if I start to deconstruct how I speak, how I say, I'm just going to be like,
yeah, analysis paralysis.
Yeah. And then you're just plagued by self-awareness. And like, as we're recording this, I could look at you, or I could look at me, and then if I start looking at me, I'm like, oh, look at my hair. Oh,
we're not recording video. That's one of the reasons why I don't record video.
But if I'm just looking at you to engage it, then I'm just sat here and I'm talking to Craig, and that's brilliant. And ask other people who know and love you for their critical feedback.
Yeah,
because we are not objective in any way, shape, or form. And so I'm not like, go figure it out. I'm like, go and practice. And you can also, what you make, you don't have to share. I'm the filmmaker who made so many films.
Floor, right?
who wouldn't show anyone. I would have like, you have a new boyfriend, and they're like, oh, you're filming. Oh, would I have seen anything? Maybe. Oh, can you show me a film? Like, no. No, what do you mean no? I'm like, no, you have an idea of me at the moment, and maybe if you watch my films, you'll have a different idea of me, but I'm not ready for that yet. So we get better at what we do more of, and then maybe as you do more of it, you start to realize, well, is there joy in this for me? Is there value in this for me? And
that's
I
key.
think a lot of people maybe think like, oh, maybe, if you're an entrepreneur or you have a project and you think, oh, this will get me more reach, or this will, there's lots of different motivations for doing podcasts. My reason for setting up a podcast was, well, number one, it's like, oh, I get to kind of have my own radio show. That'll be fun.
Mm,
And it's far easier technically than making films and doing a visual documentary.
yeah.
And it's a great excuse to go and talk to people that I want to have really interesting conversations with. And I don't want to be the gatekeeper of, well, why should I be the only person who gets to listen to that conversation? I'm really happy to have the conversation. No
Yeah.
one's there when I'm having the conversation, but then, oh, I know that there's benefit or value to that. Like, oh, okay, cool. I'll get, like, it's like saying, oh, I'd love you to meet my friend. I'd love you to meet my friend Craig.
Mm,
That's why I'm having the
yeah.
conversation with Craig. So that's my way of connecting, knowing my why, and for me, it's a medium and a format that works. I'm comfortable with the tech. It was an easy in. I have the training, and I love that it's democratized. Like, post pandemic, everyone knows how to use Zoom.
Yes. Yes.
Set
It
up
went.
Zoom. Maybe you've got a laptop and it's free. It's free to have a YouTube channel. It's free to have the basic Zoom package. And if you've got a computer, or you could do it on your phone,
Yes.
you can sign up for multiple podcast suppliers.
Mm-hmm.
You can get a free Canva account. No, is Canva? Yeah, there's a free account with Canva. You can create a graphic. You can think of a name. You can do it in the most kind of Billy Basics of, in a very like punk DIY culture,
Yeah, because the
without
part that
needing
matters
to
is
spend.
between record and stop, and if you hit that, if you're passionate about what's in there, that comes through. Um,
If there's
it's
value and quality, it will
yeah.
shine through. And an equivalent in the film world used to be that a lot of people would say like, oh, but I need this camera and I need this lighting and I need this thing and I need that. And there's a British filmmaker called Shane Meadows, and he, instead of like shooting on film, and which costs a fortune to shoot on film, it's literally like, oh wow, like
That
50
was
pounds. And I don't think that was the right shot. Cut, let's go
whoops.
again. um and I remember seeing his work at the Edinburgh Film Festival, and he shot this film on VHS tapes using his mates as actors, borrowing space and time, because it was the story, it was the storytelling and the value and the quality, and that shines through. And our Darren Aronofsky's first film, Pi, was made on a tiny, tiny budget. Before he went and made Black Swan and things like that. His second film he made on a tiny, tiny budget, huge success. His third film was given loads of money, not so much of a success. So
Mm.
it's really going back to, what is the quality of the content.
Well, there's the whole thing about the container or the constraints of a container. And in the parkour universe, this is like a thing all the time. You're like, well, you got to work with what's here, or we need to do the thing here, or like, well, the floor is lava. We add these constraints, or they're already in the space that we find. And when I fell backwards into podcasting, like as a trust fall kind of thing. I was literally just having cool conversations with people, like in places, and I'm walking and I'm talking to people, and Julie's like nodding along. And there'd be people walking behind us, we're like, bah, 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 and I get to the end of the, place to place, and people will be like, that should have been a podcast. I would have listened to that. And then I went, I guess it should be a podcast. And that's how I got started. And everything before record and after stop, I like tore through, like, what's the simplest thing that could possibly work? Because I don't want to do any of that crap. I really love the experience of recording in person. So I spent a ton of time playing Tetris, like, oh, this microphone and this cable, and like, and then it was like, okay, now let's drag it to GurLab or something. And that was fun to play with the tech, but it was nowhere near like maximal audio quality. It was like, oh, these are the simplest microphone stands that don't really fall over, and the guest can kind of work the mic without handling it. It was just like 80-20, finding what I had to do to get to the delivered thing that I was trying to create. But your point about never listening to your own podcast, I'm like, I sometimes listen on purpose to like, okay, I'm gonna get out and like see where I'm screwing up or where I have manners of speech. Like I go in with like a magnifying glass and look for things, but I don't. I learned. I used to think I had some judgment. Like I would go in with a ruler and be like, this is a good episode. This episode's a little short. This one's kind of okay. I learned, because I have the beautiful privilege of actually going places and running into people who either been on the show virtually or that people know me. And invariably, the episode that random person loved, I was like, I was thinking of not public. I don't say this to them, but I was thinking that one was subpar. But it turns out that I actually am not a good judge of what the other person is going to think. Imagine that. So your point also about every person brings a context, that brings a perspective, brings a bias to what you're capturing. All the time when I'm next to the microphone, I'm constantly thinking like, oh, everything I say is biased. And there are people who are thinking, shut up and let Julie talk, and I'm just like, and I lock up if I think about it too much. But
Yeah, you got to get out of your own way. And
amen.
for me, the sign of a really great conversation or recording is at the end of it, I'm like, I always ask myself, like, was that really good? Or like, meh. And if it was really good, it's just like, oh, it was really good. And then if someone says, what did you talk about? I go, I'm not sure. I don't know. I was just in it.
That's probably a
But
good
was it really
sign.
good?
Flow state. Yeah.
And so my my kind of deconstruction is, how did I feel at the end of it?
Mm.
And that's it. And I kind of treat it as theater, in the sense of like, that was the moment. We conversed, we connected, amazing, cool.
Mm. Yeah, when you said theater, I'm like 3 acts and story arc, and that's something I don't completely ignore it. But when I'm recording these things, I don't know. There's probably a name for this format of show where the thing either goes out or it doesn't. It's not quite a hot mess, but it's as it's found. And those don't normally have a story arc. If I'm lucky, we know where we're starting if we're lucky. And then it's just like, I don't know, we're going this journey. And then the end is somewhere when it feels like the end. And I actually think that's super easy to do. And I know a lot of people who that wigs them out. Like they want to either a story arc, not maybe literally a storyboard, but they want to know what they're supposed to be doing. And then they record and then they go back and maybe they edit to hang it on the wireframe. But the idea of like, you're going to make Craig, you're going to make a show by just pressing record and we're going to just blah, 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 for third, and then we're going to hit stop and it's going to work 300 times. Like, I'm like, yeah, how else would you do it? Because anything else sounds really hard. I don't know how to do it the other way. And maybe it's just, I never tried, but
And also, there's many forms of theater. A traditional 3-part narrative is only one way to do theater. And there's so many ways to do storytelling. And it could be an improvisation. It could be a monologue. It could be massive audience participation. It doesn't have to always follow the hero's journey. It doesn't have to be autobiographical. It doesn't have to be chronological. And when you were talking about the constraints, there's a wonderful documentary called The Five Obstructions. And it's Lars von Trier, who's a very interesting filmmaker. And he sets his friend, who's, I can't remember his name now, a French filmmaker who was living in Haiti at the time. And Lars is kind of enamored by this filmmaker. And the whole thing, it's a documentary. And he basically sets him these 5 different challenges to try and kind of undo him, to try and, kind of be like, see, you're not such a great artist. So he gives him all these challenges. So the first challenge is, you have to go and make a film where every shot is only 18 frames long. Oh, and you have to go and make it in Cuba. And you can't use actors. And so the main protagonist, so he goes, and this is kind of documentary. So you see him making the film, and then you see these little short films that he makes. And he makes a film, and he's an artist. So he approaches these challenges as like, well, this is, and just creative problem solving of how do I get my creativity around this? And he makes extraordinary films every time. And he goes back to Lars, and then they watch the film together. And then Lars is like, oh my God, and you could see he's really angry. He's really pissed off because he's like,
this
what
is
a
too
gift.
good.
I made that far too easy for you. I gave you a gift. 18 frames for every shot in Cuba, like no actors. Well, of course you made something beautiful. So he then sets another challenge and another challenge and another challenge. And the most difficult film he had to make during this film was one where he said, you can go make whatever you want with whatever budget you want. And it's the worst thing for any creative mind to do.
Mm.
And it's out of these improvisations, these adaptations, that we find other ways of exploring and being, rather than going, well, here's the formula, here's the recipe, and therefore here's the outcome. Like like there's no novelty there. There's no, and it's not to say, well, I'm a big fan of the hero's journey and the constructs, and I understand it, and
Greek
all the,
tragedy is a great thing, right?
yeah, and I'm also like a really big fan of abstract cinema and improvisation and theater that goes to places that you have no notion that it will go to, because it's like saying, well, a conversation has these rules, and it's like, bullshit. No, it doesn't. A conversation is a conversation. There's
Right.
not a conversation is only a conversation if it happens like this. Like, no, how limiting, how
Yeah.
uninspired. I let it go where it wants to go. So this, I think, just this idea of just show up and be in that moment and spend time in the now, and where it goes is where it goes.
Yeah.
And
Embrace
I,
the
I can't
constraints.
ever be responsible for how someone else receives what I say.
Yeah,
Simple as
that's a
that.
huge pitfall, especially in podcasting, because it's so already it's splintered. Like, are my reviews on Apple or my reviews on like everything's all over the place. So if you reach for that, what do they call the thing that they dangle in front of the cats? It's not cat. There's like a cat toy. It's like
Catnip or something.
well, there's like a
Or
little
the
stick
fluffy
with
thing on a
a
stick.
fluffy thing on a stick. If you reach for that, then there's like 9 of them. Like that is really dangerous in podcasting. I mean, if I release my big thing and it fails, if at least there's only one venue, like there's a clear indicator. If you want to get distracted by the indicator, there's one indicator. But for podcasting, there's just so many things. You could just spend all your time chasing that fractal chaos.
I've
I
never
think
ever looked at what my podcast reviews are.
I
Ever.
looked a while ago on Mover's Mindset, and I was just kind of like, all right. I mean, one of my really good friends said it sounds better than Cats in Heat, and I was like, I'm not sure how to take that. Like five
That's
stars,
open
okay.
to interpretation.
So I was like, that's cool.
I mean, if someone reaches out to me and says, like, that was a really great conversation, I'm like, amazing.
Mm,
And I think for me, my judge on mine is that, like I said, at the end of it, if I have this feeling of like, that was a great conversation, I'm like,
yeah,
great,
that's the definition of success.
job done.
I told myself over and over and over until now I actually believe it, and I tell everybody else. I think the definition of success is if one person listens to this episode and at some random point down the road bumps into you in real life, they can have a conversation with you and they don't have to do the first 3 or 4 minutes of like, oh, hi, I'm Bob. Nice. They can just go like, oh, wait, I know who you are. And you can just like on ramp to your conversation. That's like my definition of success. One person bumps into you, has a better conversation sooner, winning. Like, because I don't need sponsors. I don't have to accomplish anything. I don't have to
Oh, me
get the
too.
cons.
Yeah. No. And that's one thing that annoys me about some podcasts is the first 7 minutes is just sponsor talk.
Yeah, and setup, and
Yeah.
I know why. Like I get
I'm like,
it,
get on with
because
it.
the problem I have is, I mean, since I don't have that, I have to edit and I have to do all this stuff myself. But I just like, so this particular show is like 3 years old, and Movers Mindset is starting its 8th year.
Oh, wow.
And I'll,
Congratulations.
thanks. I wasn't fishing for a compliment, but along the way, like in the 3rd year with Movers Mindset, I kind of went, I have to just like do what I feel like doing. I can't pretend that I'm supposed to have like this journey where it's going to then it's going to get big enough so I can do however. I'm like, no, I'm going to keep pushing record as long as it's fun, and I'm going to hit stop. And then I'm always going to grumble because all the stuff after stop, and I'm like, blah, 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 but like, and then at the end I hit ship and I'm just like, yeah, people like it. Okay, that was worth it. Do it again. Do it again. Do it. And like, that's just
Do you like
no
it?
particular cadence. Yeah. Well, I like it in the moment. Very rare. There are 2 that I can think of where the conversation in the moment was a solid, ugh, and me and the person both went, and we hit stop.
Oh,
and,
wow.
and you know both of those people, but I'm not name dropping. And
Interesting.
they,
And do you know why?
yes,
Not to share it, but do you know do
yes,
you know
it
why?
was because, and it took me a while to figure out why. In one case, it was because the person, and you actually know both of these people, like Julie knows both these people. One of them, I tried to force him into the box that was the show. And what it actually was, there's an awesome, I had like 9,000 hours of great conversations with the person, but none of them were a mover's mindset podcast. So I learned my lesson about, just because I have great conversations with people doesn't mean I can stuff them into the box. They don't fit in that show. I had to learn that one the hard way. We had a
Great
great laugh.
lesson.
We had a great laugh about it, and then went and did other cool things for hours. It was awesome. And then the other time it happened, I tried to record an episode from Movers Mindset. This was also very early on. And me and the other person, who know each other really well, we have great conversations all the time. Like, we should totally be able to do this. We tried to do it without really knowing what we were doing. Like, we tried to just like dance, and we were like, and like we couldn't move. And in hindsight, we realized that it was because we tried to just like cold start it. We hadn't really discussed, like, what
You
are we
need the
trying to do here?
foreplay.
Like, what's it for? Yeah. Nice. Yeah, I forgot about that. Let's not talk about I still have flashbacks to the cannoli at the place after the thing. That's a great story. Too much sugar and up too late. I'm watching the time tick, and the idea of this show is that it's supposed to be fairly short. But I want to pull on one more string, because you and I are going to wind up doing lots of episodes. But for this one, are there any constraints that you can think of? Because I love to try and find, ways to make people walk away going, "Ooh, I should try that." Are there any constraints in the podcasting space? Let's just say, like in the concept of audio, that you can think of that people might not have tried, or like, something from documentary, like, here's I can learn it in school, where they say, try standing on one leg, or see what I'm saying? Like, I'm looking for interesting ways to constrain oneself as a podcaster that we might not have thought of. Not an easy question.
Oh, I have a good one. When the other person's talking, make sure your lips are sealed and you're breathing in and out through your nose.
Oh, that leads us to something.
And it wasn't the intention to lead us to where we can go, but what it does is it makes you kind of bite your tongue, and it allows the other person to speak, and it trains you as a better listener. And unless you're listening, you can't kind of take it to the next bit. You're not, and you don't have to be in this kind of reactive response all the time. Otherwise, it just ends up like, which is
Table
nice
tennis.
and
Yeah.
and natural, and we do it, and it's in conversation. But if you can train your listening, and the best way to train your listening is to breathe in and out through your nose, and your lips are sealed. And this also does a lot of things for your nervous system, but it's also going to allow you to actually listen. Hearing and listening are different skills.
Yes.
You're hearing the person, but you're not everyone is a listener, and it's something that can really help. And when you listen, you will then really start to hear, how is my audio? How is their audio? What are they saying? Am I sighing? Am I like going doing these weird mouthy things?
Spraying macaroni and cheese.
And what are the extraneous sounds in your room? Do
Yeah.
you listen to your room? If you were to like record Atmos, what would that sound like? Like, I can hear the fridge, but my fridge is back there, like it's
Yeah.
behind me.
I don't hear it. I might hear
Yeah.
it in post, but it will stay in.
It will stay in, and to also know, well, as long as it wasn't really disruptive, and
Yes.
sometimes my dog comes in and his water bowl's nearby, and he's a very, very loud water drinking dog. And so I'm not prepared to not allow my dog to drink water during a recording.
Right.
So I just make it part of it. I'm like, oh, and it's generally not an if Pax is going to do it. It's like,
Mm.
well, it's just a when. So when he does it, I'm just like, oh, it's just Pax getting some water.
Well, if
And
I
it's a
was sitting
part
in
of
the kitchen,
life.
if I was sitting in the kitchen, he would come in the room, and I often joke my podcasts are powered by coffee, and then I bang my cup and dogs. And that's always like, I mean, sometimes you'll hear me in podcast episodes where I'm like, all right, so tell me more about that. And I'm like, I'm way far from the mic because I'm scratching the dog that's under the table. There's no dog in it.
And it's a really nice way to connect. I've had a lot of podcasts where, visually I'm seeing the other person I'm talking to, and my dog walks past in the background, and they're like, "Oh, what kind of one is he?" And then everyone's at ease.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's at ease, and you've found this common ground. And so I don't deviate from that. Like, no, but hang on, we're supposed to be talking about sleep and breath work. Da, da, da. It's like,
Right.
no, this one of the a really great podcast conversation I had last year. We spent the whole first 10, 15 minutes talking about our dogs.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm love me, love my dog. So if you're not into dogs and you don't want to listen to me, then that's a great filter.
I was like, oh, here we go. Where's she at? Because I agree. If people don't like dogs, I usually say they must have had a really bad experience at some point. I already mentioned I'm watching the time. We've talked about like 50 things, and nobody has any idea who you are. I'm like, okay, at this point, um, tell me, because the breath thing. Let's do the breath thing is really important. So tell me where people can learn more about the breath work, coaching, and however you want to phrase that. I don't know if I want to say teaching or courses. And where can people go to find more about your podcast, and what's your podcast called?
Yeah. So I'm multi-passionate. So I am a filmmaker, a podcast. I have a podcast called The Curious Midlife. I am
It's
a
a
published
great
author.
name.
Thank you. I'm a published author. The book is called Breaking the Jump. I am a movement coach, parkour coach, and certified breathwork coach. So my recent passions have shifted. So I'm still in the creative industries and I still do that work. And I'm also very passionate these days about working, especially with women in midlife, and inviting them to see the world as a playground, to move
Mm.
differently, and to know that that you can really age in a really positive, fun way that has nothing to do with spending hours in the gym and doing extreme diets or
Mhm.
extreme anything. And the breath work has been such a beautiful gift to add into all of this, because it's a movement skill, because we're breathing all the time. We're all very effective, and that's brilliant. Like, nobody should stop that. We're all really good. Keep breathing. That's really nice and really good and really important. However, how we breathe is one of the biggest indicators of where our nervous system's at.
Yes.
If we move through the world in fight or flight or rest and digest, and everything is happening downstream of our breathing. So if you're
Mm.
a heavy overbreather, then everything from how you sleep, your anxiety, your thought, your creative thinking, your metabolism, your blood pressure, your recovery, your
Mm.
performance, your memory, your focus is all affected by how much you're breathing, how quickly you're breathing, how heavy you're breathing. And the most beautiful thing is, and I'm a minimalist, so it's free, it's with you all the time. You don't need, it's not like, oh, well, I can't do my breath work because I left that thing in my other
Yeah.
bag, or it's in the car. It's like, no, it's just me, myself, and I. And so I help people restore functional breathing patterns in 3 to 4 weeks. And it's extraordinary and it's amazing and it's really exciting. So, and it's always something where I say to people, you have no idea of your potential until you've restored functional breathing
Mm.
patterns. You have no idea of your potential for how happy you can be, how healthy you can be, how strong you can be, how calm you can be. So I do all that fun stuff, and people can find out about all of these different passions at julieangel.com. And there's various free resources there. You can get a movement snacks guide. You can get a free crawling quadrupedal movement guide. You can see my films. You can watch Movement of Three and find out, well, what's the big deal about this little short film?
I think it's
And
awesome.
you can find my podcast, and you can reach out, and I'd be very happy to connect with anyone who's found us through this.
Terrific. Um, we had a pre-call, and I was like, so sorry that it took like 8 years to get around to inviting you on the other show, which we'll do shortly. but it was everything that I knew it would be. So it was a delight. I'm actually like silly excited because there's like a pile of podcasters who have no clue who you are. And I was like, oh, I hadn't even thought about that. Like the other show's audience, they know who you are. They'd love to hear from you too. But these people, they don't even know who you are. They're going to be so excited when they find this out. So I had a terrific time, obviously. And I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down and chat.
Well, thank you so much. And for anyone who's listening, hello. And it's really nice to meet you. And thank you, Craig. Have a beautiful day.